Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett, and I am joined, as always, by Tim Sutherland.
Hey.
And we are gearing up for the fall, and we are excited about this brand new series that we are tackling called Making Room for Life.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah, Tim.
Have you ever seen that thing where someone takes a big glass jar and then they've got some kind of medium-sized
Pickles?
Rocks.
Oh, rocks.
Rocks.
Okay, yeah.
And then they got some sand.
Right.
And if you pour all the sand in first,
Uh-huh.
then you can't get all the rocks in.
Right.
But then if you take it all out again and put the rocks in first,
Right.
and
then
then
put
pour
sand
all the
over
sand
it.
in, guess what happens?
You can get both things in the jar.
How's that possible?
Well, I think it has to do with physics.
Really? And is physics about anything that has to do with this series?
I think it does.
Because depending on what order you put things in, depends on whether or not there's,
Room for them.
yeah.
Wait a minute.
Huh.
This series is called Making Room for Life.
See what I did there?
So it's almost like the rocks and the sand are parts of our lives. But I'm the glass jar. And if I put them in the wrong order, I can't get them all in.
Something like that.
But I want everything in the jar.
Yeah,
And God wants everything in the jar for us.
exactly. Because that would be
A good life.
life.
Yeah, that would be life.
But you don't just have life. You have to kind of like that.
You have to make room for it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Why
all
don't we
right.
do a series on that?
I think we should.
That'd be cool.
I'm really excited about this series.
Look at that.
And let's go ahead and talk about
Okay.
week 1, because I think what you've just seen illustrated was our overview for the whole series. That's what we're aiming for. This is one of these felt needs series that's also going to incorporate and include our core values, what we believe in, what we think our attenders should be engaging in, stepping into behaviors that will align them towards the Jesus mission. And truly create a life that's more abundant. So,
Best possible series to invite your unchurched friends to.
and it also kicks off several of our brand new launches, relaunches. Very excited about what we're going to be able to do with this series. So good stuff.
Yep. And I mentioned that image because we're going to try and carry that image throughout the series.
Okay.
So this is really, I think, maybe the first ever series where we had a particular big image that wasn't that was for the whole deal. So,
Right.
and there's lots of possibilities with it, but it's just one way to make it as memorable as possible and as interesting as possible, especially people go, oh, even if they've seen it before, it's still just more interesting.
And it's not when you see later in the discussion we talk about rocks. We're not talking about rock and roll.
No.
We're talking about tying into those metaphors
Yes.
and how we're using that metaphor to communicate.
Yep.
Good stuff. Well, let's dive in because it is a 6-week series. Now, some of our locations, just to say out loud, will be taking this 6-week series and doing 3 weeks in the fall and then 3 weeks in the spring. And so some of them will be thinking of Making Room for Life Part 1 and Making Room for Life Part 2. So when we get to that point, we'll kind of have some kind of a communication about a break.
Is there anything about this series where it makes sense to divide it into 2 parts?
Well, I think it does because I think that you've got the first 3 are focusing in on the 3 C's.
Oh,
And
so the first 3 parts are like this is the latest rendition of the 3 C's.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And
All
so it becomes a really nice place to
Cool.
to stop and move into a different direction. So some locations will be doing a different following 3 weeks as they'll be working on a fall financial series. And so then, much like what we did last year for All In, when we get to the spring, then we'll flip it. And so those who have done the full 6 weeks of Making Room for Life will then have an opportunity to do that 3-week series on financial planning, financial, figure out what those ABCs are
Yeah.
as we look at that series. So
Makes sense.
so that's happening, but let's dive right into week 1 of Making Room for Life.
Yep.
And this week is called Making Room for God, and it is the Celebrate theme.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about that, Tim. What are we talking about?
Well, each week of the series, I'm really extra juiced about the series because each week of the series, we are using a story from the life of Jesus to show how Jesus made room for all these various important rocks. Instead of being a person who's always filling up his life with sand and there's no room for what really matters. Every week it's a story from Jesus' life, and it's as basic as that sounds. I don't remember the last time we did that. Do you?
About his life? No, maybe his teachings.
Yeah.
Or his parables, things
and
like
each
that.
one's a story from his life.
Right, I like that.
And we're also using a story in week one. We're referencing and teaching a story in week one that we haven't taught on very often, about the time when Jesus and his family have gone to Jerusalem for the Passover, which was both a big party and a big religious festival, and they sort of traveled as this extended family group, and they're heading home, and he's like probably about 12 years old at this part of the story, and then suddenly on the way home, Mary and Joseph are like going,
"Where'd Jesus go?"
Yeah, and so they kind of freak out a little bit because they assumed he was with family, and everybody in the family's going, "I don't know, I thought he's with you. I don't know, he thought he was with you." So they kind of freak and go running back to Jerusalem, and then they find him in the temple, and it says that he was both listening and being taught and asking questions, but he was also giving answers, and everybody was amazed at what's going on there. And they come in and they kind of go like, "Hey, Jesus, how could you do this to us?
Right. This is not cool, Jesus."
Yeah, right. Yeah, like they didn't quite figure out that he was going to be a pretty good kid. He's 12, and at least,
right.
and
First runaway to church.
Yes. And it's really interesting, and because they're like going, "What are you doing here?" Which I think is funny, and then he says this interesting thing. He says, "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" And then it says, "But he did not understand what they were saying to him." And so
they did not understand what he was saying.
Oh, excuse me, I misspoke.
Yep.
Thank you for unmisspeaking.
Last thing I would want is for us to turn the Bible into something that we're changing words.
I know.
So I just want to make sure we got it right.
That would be bad.
Yeah.
That would be really, really bad.
They didn't understand.
Yeah, and so we're talking about this story as Jesus making room for that celebrate aspect, where he's not like just having philosophical or theological conversations. The temple in that day was the equivalent of what church services are in our day. It was both a place to worship God, but to hang out and talk and discuss about God. It was a dedicated time where you were there for one reason and one reason only, at least ideally, which was to draw closer to God, experience God, all that stuff. And so making room for God in week one is like going, okay. Well, I'll just use the example. Willow Creek recently did a study where they surveyed their attenders, and Eric, of Willow Creek attenders, what would you guess is the average per month attendance at weekend services at Willow Creek?
It's hard for me to guess because I know the answer.
Oh, okay. Well, let's just pretend you don't know.
Okay, if I pretend, I would say, Willow Creek, it's a big church and it's popular, people like it.
Yeah.
And they do good stuff there, so I'd say probably 2 or 3 times a month.
Yeah, I mean, if they're at like 20,000 people must go there a lot.
Right.
And here they are, really strong church, 1.7. The average person is there to celebrate, to worship, to do the God thing particularly.
Just less than 2 times a month.
Yeah.
That's surprising. Well, I would say, Brian Werner might be able to speak to this, but because of the homegrown nature and because he's really dove in on attendance figures, like we know with our downtown location who comes when, like we actually do like assign the membership kind of thing and put it in the offering. And that number is not that dissimilar in terms of, the third.
Wait a minute, not that dissimilar.
See what I did there?
Similar. I do. I mean, not that dissimilar equals.
And so there's a chunk of people that are at about 3 times a month. There's a third that is just under 2, and then there's a third that's maybe once a month. And so
So what do you think the average is at your campus?
I think it's probably very similar. I think it might be a little bit higher because the numbers are lower, so you have more. You have more. Those who are devoted maybe are coming more often. It's kind of skew that number, but you're still looking at probably twice a month.
And the reason I mention this is not because it's you're a good person if you go more. No, it's that I think for those of us who are bothering to involve ourselves in this podcast, it might seem so rudimentary to go talking about going to church.
Right.
Because
they're already there.
And probably a lot of us, like how many times a week how many times a month did you grow up going to church?
Oh, every week.
All of them.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's when you go to church when you're on vacation, that's when you know.
Oh, yeah. We had to go to church. We had to find either a Christian church or an Episcopal church so we could take communion.
Right.
Because you
right.
couldn't just go to church. You had to go to church and take communion.
Right.
So I'm like going,
We didn't. We were Southern Fried
Yeah.
Baptist, so
There you go.
we just had to make sure that happened once a quarter.
That's
We were okay. We were okay with skipping communion.
Anyhow, the point is we need to not think that it's somehow too simple of a big idea to really change somebody's life. To go, hey, look, this is a priority. Not because you should, but because of what could happen when you do. And it's like, hey, what's Jesus doing? Did Jesus, is he like a bad Jesus if he doesn't hang out in the temple a lot? That's not even the right question. It's, this is important to him, and being there, and he's like going, you don't get me. And what's interesting is they didn't get him, and what we're hoping is to get people to the place where at least someone in their life would go, I don't get that. I don't get why you would, not disappear for 2 or 3 months from church like everybody else does in the summer.
Sure.
Next year, or you actually, that's like a thing. Why do you do that? Are you like some fundy? And they would go, no, I just want there to be room in my life for life. And so that's one of the rocks that I put in my jar. And so both celebration services and then that other aspect, the personal, private, so to speak, element of prayer and Bible reading, the whole so-called devotional time, that's the other flip side of the coin, but it is one coin that we like to call celebrate around here, and we're just got this big idea that goes, hey, this is a rock that you want in your jar. You don't want it left over because your jar is all filled up with sand. Put this rock in as one of the first things.
No, I love that. I think it is a good reminder, that we tend to think of our audience as a captive audience, and they just simply aren't.
They're not.
They're all over the place, and they show up once and then they don't show up for 3 weeks.
Right.
And it's not even about whether or not there's something wrong with that. We're just talking about what it means to communicate to everyone that this is a big rock for you to value and for you to place first in your life.
Yeah, it's the difference between a rock and a rule. We're just saying this is not sand. Because typically, we gotta get that. Number one rule of public speaking is know your audience. I think the same thing is true for us as a creative arts team. How do we think about this? I go if there's nothing else to do, or if the weather's bad, or if
If we had a fight the day before, and so we want to get all kind of healed up, so we'll do a little penance and go to church tomorrow. Oh yeah, well if we're gonna fight like that, we're gonna go on to church tomorrow.
Yeah. Or I could shame you because I'm going.
Right.
Why aren't you going?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And then we can fight on the way to church and then pretend at church we're not fighting. Not that I would ever.
No.
Or you. No, ever. Anyhow, but keep in mind, there's that person who never in their life has this ever been a rock. At best, it was a little sand if there was any room left. And this is going, wow, what could happen in my life if this became a rock?
Yeah, no, it's good. All right, let's talk about week 2 then.
Yep.
This is another big step, another paradigm shift for people as we're making room for people.
Oh, much
and we're
bigger,
talking about
I would say.
The connect piece.
Yeah, connect piece.
It's going to get to small groups, I'm sure.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about this and what Jesus had to say about that.
Yep. Once again, the story is a story from Jesus' life, and it's from the same weekend, not the exact same weekend, but the same time of year, the festival of the Passover. But it's right before it's the Passover, during which he's going to be arrested, tortured, crucified, killed, buried, all of that stuff. And he knows it's coming, and apparently nobody else really got it. He had to be feeling just so alone, so as whatever it meant for Jesus to freak out, he had to be somewhere near there. And yet, what does he do? He gets together with his closest friends, and he has a meal. And he makes sure there's a meal, and they eat together. And then he does this culturally, this countercultural thing of, even though he's the head honcho, he wraps a towel around his waist and starts washing their feet, which was something that only the servants and they would hire like the person who couldn't get a real job or couldn't find a well-paying job to do. It's just a lowly job, agricultural society, sandals, bare feet, yuck kind of thing. And he does this, and this is about that connect piece. You see, it just blows me away that, and I don't ever think I saw it until I was working on this, the big idea graphs for this series. Blows me away that when he had every right in the world to just be thinking about himself, what he's thinking about is not necessarily the needs of others, but being with others, and still contributing and still being a part of this connecting community, which were the first disciples, which was his small group. And I love it because he still sees connecting as a rock in his life, even though within 24 hours he's gonna be dead in a doornail. And that's, I think it's a powerful testimony to going, look, if it was that important to him, what could happen in my life if I tried with it becoming that important to me?
Right.
And so in the same way that for a lot of people, it's just really weird to the point, or never even conceived of going to church more on a priority basis, getting in a small group and that being like a rock in my life. I mean, sure, if there's enough room in my life, I'll pour some of that sand in around the edges, but that this kind of goes in first, that's where we're trying to get to and go, look, this is what Jesus did. It doesn't mean you should. It means him telling you is that this is what's true, and wherever there's truth, there's freedom, and there's life, and so this is about what could happen. Not what should happen necessarily, but what could happen. So this is all about connect and have connecting and being part of a small group and hanging out with people from your small group as being something that you don't just do when it fits. You make other things fit around it instead of making it fit around other things. And this is a struggle for people like myself who have been, basically born and raised in church, because I wasn't born and raised in a church where small groups mattered. The only thing that mattered was going to service.
Right.
And then if you were kind of a super Christian, you went to Sunday school too.
Sure.
But,
prayer meeting on Wednesday.
That'd be the super duper Christians,
super
right?
Duper, yeah.
And so, for me, first week, I don't really need to hear that. I need to hear this. I many times don't treat I'm part of 2 small groups, and I often treat it as like, it's something I do. It's not a big deal if I didn't get it, or we take the summer. I'm not saying it's bad to take the summer off. I'm just saying, well, what does it say that we do?
Right.
I know, like, your small group doesn't take the summer off in the terms of not getting together. You're really intentional in your small group. I happen to know.
That's true.
Because I'm part of a group that was birthed from your small group.
That's true.
And so these groups are getting together, and it's like you guys are saying, hey, we're going to have these. It's going to be there.
Right.
And it's not a should, but it's could. Hey, come on out. In fact, you were
kind enough to host one of them.
You were kind enough to ask us to.
Well, see, there you go.
See,
So
there
it
you
all
go.
works out.
There you have it.
But it is true in the sense that, you think about the stuff that somebody has going on.
Oh, yeah.
And, you don't want to go full guilt trip with the Jesus story. You almost thought I was going to do that. You don't, because, he's getting ready to put the sins of the world on his back.
Yeah.
And the things that he's got going on. So, but it does help you see what are the things that he values.
And I love it that he says when Peter goes, hey, what's going on? Why are you washing my feet? And he goes, you do not realize what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. And I've thought about what it would be later, and see, typically it was saying, oh, you'll understand later the importance of serving people. That was how I was taught this story. I'm wondering if he was wondering about Peter understand something else. Oh, later you'll understand how much us meant to me.
I think that connects too to the thing that happens, because the mechanics of small group can sometimes get sort of nitpicked apart. It's like, well, what are you actually doing? Well, for us, what we're actually doing is we're getting together in somebody's home for an hour and a half, and we're talking about Bible things, and we're hanging out. The mechanics of that are not particularly revolutionary or super spiritual, and in some ways can be considered fairly kind of, a little boring or mechanical or goofy. It's like surely there's another way to to have community besides this chosen way. And it's true, there's lots of ways,
Right.
to skin the cat. But I think it's like sometimes you don't understand what those gatherings are doing to build your relationships with others
Right.
until something happens later. Something happens down the road.
And
then
later
you understand.
right.
Yeah.
And so,
it's true.
we're saying, don't wait till later to understand. You can understand now. Right. Even if you've never experienced it, you can understand now. Or don't wait till later. I mean, I heard somebody I was having I was spending some time with one of the guys from our church lately, and 2 nights before last, and he said that lately he'd been talking to a lot of people who had left the church to go to some other church. Why would someone go to another church? Because they were looking for
deeper teaching?
Yes, they went looking for deeper teaching. And then they went to this other church, insert whichever one, deeper teaching du jour here. And yes, I am knocking it. I am. Not that church, but the mindset. And then something horrible happened in their life. And no one was there for them.
Yeah.
And then they come running back, and I'm going, so why did they come running? I'm going, teaching pastor. I'm going, oh, so they come back and going, our teaching was deep enough. And the guy goes, no, they came back because there was real community here. I'm going, oh. But really, it's a good story for this week because he's talking about people who go, well, this church gets all real fancy and intellectual and so-called deep about Scripture, but that's what they do. And then what they don't do is make room for people. Not because they don't care about people, but just because it's a different way of experiencing what it is to be a Christ follower. And one of the reasons we do these 3C series is to go, hey, you can know what it means to be a Christ follower. It's about celebrating, connecting, and contributing in such a way that you're part of the Jesus mission, which is about reaching, restoring, and reproducing the Jesus mission. And so you can know. And for some people, it'll be absolutely revolutionary to first time in life to say, you know what? We're not saying this is the right way to do it. We're just saying this is our understanding of what this life looks like, and you can make room for it, and life can come to you in a new way.
And, I mean, we're talking too long about this, but we are passionate about it. But in that same story, Judas Iscariot walks out. Like, it's not perfect. His small group was not perfect.
What if he was looking for deeper teaching?
He might have been.
He might have been.
He left. I mean,
yeah.
And right after that is when Jesus goes down and washes the feet. So I mean, I think you're looking at something that we're not trying to claim is perfect, and neither is Jesus in that moment. But he's saying it's important. It's one of the rocks.
That's right.
It's one of the rocks.
And what better way to show it than think about it. Does your small group mean so much to you that if you had 24 hours to live, that's who you'd want to be with? I don't mean that as a guilt-oriented question. I'm just meaning going, well, no, of course, because that's not a rock like, family is. Right. And this whole thing, the idea that family comes first, that is a completely non-biblical idea.
Right.
And sometimes it's anti-biblical, and it's going, this is radical to say, hey, who's my brothers and who's my mothers, the ones who do the will of God, the people who that I can connect with on the Jesus mission. This is not your father's Oldsmobile when it comes to what does it mean to be a Christian.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to the next week. It is session 3. We're making room for mission.
Yep.
And there's a buzzword we talk
Yep.
about a lot. And this week we're specifically talking about the contribute piece of the 3 C's. This is also a designated week for small group commissioning. It's the time that we start to get underway communicating about Blast, and so there's maybe opportunities for people to talk in terms of contributing, serving there. But the small group commissioning I think is great because we're together, we're a small group, we're going out on mission, we're going to make the world a different place, we're going to contribute in that particular way. So I think that's strong, and that's something that we've been building up ever since the Get Off Your Donkey series too, in terms of communicating. So let's talk a little bit about what happened with Jesus in his life with regards to contributing.
Well, it's an interesting story, and it's treated as a teaching thing, but it's really, I think, more of a story thing. So Jesus is growing in his popularity. People are kind of clamoring after him, and he's drawing really large crowds, and he says this really radical thing to the crowds, kind of at like one of the early peaks in his popularity or kind of curb appeal. He basically says this thing. He says, if anybody comes to me, if anyone wants to follow me, and he doesn't hate his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his sister and brother, even himself, he can't follow me. I mean, Jesus was such a manipulative, slick salesman, wasn't he?
Yeah,
wasn't he, Eric?
Where do I sign?
Yeah.
Shut up and let me give you my money.
Oh, I am so in on that. And then he goes on and he tells these two stories, these two parables about somebody who sets out to build a tower, like a significant structure, but he doesn't count the cost, and so he builds the tower like halfway up, and then everybody laughs at him, which might sound kind of juvenile to us, but in Eastern society that was huge because it's all about face and reputation, and your reputation was like one of the rocks in your jar, or if not the rock in your jar, was your reputation, your standing in the community. It's like, when you're going to build this community, you're going to build this tower halfway up, run out of money because you didn't figure out how much it's going to cost to complete it, then you're going to lose something that really matters to you because you didn't count the cost of what it means to follow me. And then he tells a story of a king going out to war and not figuring out whether he should go to war or ask for terms of peace, make some kind of a truce here. And that's really a kind of a life and death deal. And talk about rocks. The tower thing is not just quaint. That was a rock to them. And then if that wasn't enough of a rock, then he starts talking about getting killed. And then he comes back and he says in the same way, unless you give up everything you have, you can't be my disciple, you can't be my follower, which to us might sound like a rule, but that's not a rule. It's talking about the Jesus mission, about being someone who contributes, celebrate, connect, contribute, somebody who contributes to the Jesus mission, not as something that I do if I have time or margin or if I'm not going through a lot in my life. But no, this is a rock. This is something that goes in the jar. This is not sand around the edges. This is one of the rocks that goes in the jar. And that each week we're building a more and more culturally, a more and more countercultural, counterintuitive picture of what it means to be a person of faith. Wait. Celebrate, connect, and contribute isn't just something you do. These are like three of the, what's the right word, non-negotiable. These go in first.
They're almost bedrocks.
Ha! See what he did there? That's why you make the medium bucks.
That's right. That's right.
So we're going to say it. We're going to say, look, the Jesus mission is not about, hey, come on and help us if you can. You got a little spare time. No, we're saying, hey, look, this doesn't make you a good person if you do it. But if you want life, if you want the life that's really life, it won't work as sand because this is a rock.
It's a rock.
Yep.
I love it. I love it. And I love the connection there for a great weekend of small group commissioning. I think it really kind of makes that we're not just sort of tipping our hat to the notion of philanthropy or whatever, but this is who we are, right? This is who we are. All right, well, this concludes part one of Making Room for Life. So if you're a campus that is doing that and then is getting ready to move into the financial series, that little package is the 3C series for this fall.
Okay.
And so if you are not, then you're continuing on. And if you are, then in the spring, you might want to check this out because here we are and we're planning for the spring. And this is part 2 of Making Room for Life. And so that, really, it's as simple as to say, hey, in the fall, we had part 1 of this series. It was called Making Room for Life, and it laid out the 3 C's. And this week, we're starting we're going to finish that series called Making Room for Life Part 2.
And that's one of the reasons that this is a potentially 2-part series that I'm kind of excited about, the rock and sand and jar, to which I have to give a shout out to Jordan, whose last name I can never pronounce correctly.
Beery?
Is it Beery?
Sure.
It looks like Bière or Bière
Sure, yeah,
or something.
I think it's Bière.
But Jordan Beery, he stepped in. I just kind of roped him into teaching team when we were working on this, and he goes, "Oh, this is like that whole rock and sand in the jar thing." And it was like, ding! I would have never ever thought of it without you, Jordan. And
it's too bad he won't watch this. But no, I'm kidding, Jordan. You probably watch this every time.
Hi, Jordan.
I would not suggest
Yes.
that that's silly.
I heard somebody was watching this on YouTube and putting dislike every time. Is that true?
Can you believe that? I think some jackal
Jackal.
has been watching us on YouTube and then disliking the videos. So if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe you like it. What would that be like?
Yeah.
If somebody tried to do some counter programming
Yes.
for that dislike jackal.
Yes.
That would be great. All right, let's move on.
Anyhow,
let's talk
so
about
thanks,
session
Jordan.
4. Session 4, we are making room for rest.
And everybody will be going, oh, if this is part 2 for us, we're going, oh, I remember this. This was the rocks and the sand and the jar thing.
Yeah.
See?
So what are we going to talk about this time?
So we're, in terms of making room for rest, I got a great story from Jesus' life where, just like we did previously with commissioning, he commissions the disciples and he sends them out to do the Jesus mission thing. He sends them out 2 by 2, kind of
Just like the
small group boogaloo,
Yep.
part 2,
Yep.
redo kind of thing. And then he sends them out and awesome things happen. They're healing people, they're teaching, people are finding their way back to God, demons are getting cast out, stuff like that. Illnesses are being healed. They come back and they're really juiced, and then the crowds are growing because the Jesus mission is multiplying. But then it's really interesting. Despite how great and awesome everything is going, Jesus says to them, hey, come away with me by yourselves. Because they were so involved in the Jesus mission thing. They had made so much room for life that they didn't make room for even eating, which last time I checked,
it's important. You need to do it.
It kind of matters
to
a
live,
little.
To live.
It kind of matters a little.
And if you didn't have eating, you just have our bliss strategy. That doesn't make any sense.
It took me a second.
That's okay.
I liked it.
Totally different big idea.
I liked it a lot. So basically, and what we're going to be careful though here is we're not trying to treat this story as like an allegory where, we're the disciples and we should do what he does, go out there and burn ourselves out, and then he'll come back and say, hey, come away with me because you need to heal up. No. No, this is about Jesus saying, as important as the Jesus mission is, rest is one of the rocks too. And see, our culture is screwed up on this. We think of rest as either an end in itself in the sense of leisure, or we think of it as just something you do as a means to an end, which is something you do so you can get back out there and make some more money, or get back out there and get better at this or pursue
Recharge the batteries.
Yes, rejuvenate. And that kind of thing. And see, both of those are kind of messed up. What Jesus is trying to teach him here is going, hey, look, rest is one of the rocks. Not because you need it or because you have to have it, but because it's without rest, you don't have life. It's not a necessary evil, it's a necessary good. And so we're going to help people go, wow, that's what this Jesus guy is actually saying, that he doesn't want me to just rest so bad things won't happen. He actually wants me to find good things by not being so driven and obsessed and filling my jar up all the time with everything else. He wants me to fill it up with some space to get away with him and the people that I'm close to, and not recharge, but to experience life. Great story, love it. I love it especially for those who are continuing through in the Par 6 kind of approach to this series, because it'll be like, hey, no matter how gung-ho we are about the Jesus mission, we're also just as gung-ho about something that sounds so nice as rest. But rest is actually a very, very radical thing. Everybody knows we live in a culture that really doesn't know anything about rest, and that's why we're all, hypertensive and dying of heart attacks.
Well, and I mean, I would say too, defining what that means weekly, defining what that means monthly, defining what that means in seasons.
Yep.
I just heard some jackal today talking about his vacation.
Another jackal?
Same jackal.
Oh, same jackal.
And he says,
jackal.
He says vacation is exhausting.
Oh.
Working so hard to choose to rest. I mean, sometimes we have that a little bit backwards in our society too. When you talk about, vacation time is not necessarily exactly what we're talking about here.
Right.
When it means, when we're talking about a Sabbath, or we're talking about what it means to rest in God. So I think that'll be an important part for us to provide sort of countercultural information in terms of what we think of in terms of, I got to work really, 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 really hard so I can go work really hard at having a vacation, which I don't end up really resting because I'm walking around Disney World like a crazy person. I'm exhausted. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
All right, let's move on then to week 5 as we make room for generosity. And how could we have suspected that we would talk about generosity being one of the rocks when so often so much sand gets filled up into that jar before we start thinking about what it means to give.
Or we think generosity is sand. that if there's room left in the jar,
If there's room left, we can
we can
sprinkle
some in there. But if
generosity
there's
on
not,
top.
what am I going to
Yeah.
do? My jar's too full, or whatever. So we're telling this wonderful story, one of my favorites in all of Scripture, where it's just before, it's not that long before Jesus is going to lay it all on the line for the people he loves. And he's having dinner, and this woman who's unnamed comes out of nowhere, and she's holding this really expensive jar of really expensive perfume. And when you think expensive perfume here, don't think like, it's like $100 per ounce and a half. No, we're talking about something that was so valuable, it was a form of investment in those days. A person might buy a jar of perfume like this and hold on to it as their way of holding on to something for retirement, then they'd sell it when they get old. So she may have been a widow where this was her entire everything. And Jesus is reclining at the table, and she comes, and it wasn't like a jar with a stopper, because they didn't really have those as much. They were jars that were kind of sealed shut, so you had to break the jar open. If you would imagine, like kind of breaking a bottle at the neck so you could pour it out. And she breaks it, and she pours it on, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus. She pours it on Jesus' head. Now, why does she do that? Thank you for
She was
asking.
baptizing him.
No. That would be sprinkling.
Oh, sorry, right.
Baptizo, Eric, not
Sorry.
rantizo. Sprinkling is
Got it.
rantizo.
I got caught up.
It was a sign of honor to anoint somebody's head with oil or with sweet-smelling perfume in those days. I think partially because they didn't shower that much, and you want to have a nice meal, and it's like, oh, the sweet smell around here, it's coming from Jesus here because it was a sign of honor, it was a sign of love, it was a sign of respect. Nobody had done it. She does this thing, but she doesn't just take a little of it and like dab it behind his ears or put a little on his temples. She just dumps the whole thing out on Jesus' head. And it's so interesting, such a great story, because she does this awesome thing for Jesus. And guess who thinks that it's foolish or stupid or wasteful?
We're going to go with the disciples?
Yeah, we're going to go with the ones who are supposed to get it.
The I Don't Get It Club?
Yeah, the I Don't Get It club. And they're going, hey, this money could have, and they say this thing that sounds so inarguable. This money that perfume could have been sold and the money given to the poor, which that sounds so almost Christian-y, doesn't it? And then Jesus goes, no, you know what? What she did for me is important. And then he says this really amazing thing. He says, she's done a precious thing for me. She's anointed me for burial. And wherever the gospel's told, they're going to tell her story. And as far as I know, this is the only person in all of Scripture that he ever says that about. And since that day, we've talked about it before, but since that day, Jesus' prophecy has been fulfilled over and over again, that when the gospel is preached, they tell this story, the woman who breaks the jar, dumps it all out, somebody says, hey, that's a waste, that's not a rock, But see, it's this personally, and she was the only one. She was the only one who got to do this, because that same perfume that was used to make somebody smell better when they hadn't showered was also put on a corpse to keep the smell of it decaying down during the mourning period, so you could stand to be around the body and mourn and grieve over the body. And only the closest members, or the people who are closest to you in your life, would be the ones who would come to the tomb and anoint your body and put perfume on your body for burial. But see, nobody got to do that with Jesus. And you know why? Because that's why they went to the tomb. The women went to the tomb that morning to anoint his body for burial. They couldn't do it because of the Sabbath thing, and that was considered like working on the Sabbath. No one anoints Jesus' body for burial except this woman. And she got a lot of pushback from somebody saying, you know what, you're taking this love for Jesus thing a little too far here.
Right.
Let's be more practical about this.
Right.
And what sounds more practical than, hey, I don't know if they actually said, don't you know kids are starving in China or Africa or wherever? But and then Jesus goes, no, leave her alone. That she's done a beautiful thing for me. And where we're going at with generosity here is that generosity is not a rule, it's a rock. And it's this deeply personal thing, and that Jesus is wanting you to experience something. We want to help people experience that you're not just going through the motions or helping a good cause or contributing in some philanthropic way. No, what you're doing is something very deeply personal for the one who has died for you and who death couldn't hold back for you. It's this really personal, and I know we tend to think about the word intimate in a sexual way, which is kind of messed up, but it's really, in the truest sense of the word, an intimate thing that nobody can contribute generously because of who Jesus is to them exactly like you do. And we want to get that and go, ooh, I'm not just doing this because this is a good thing. This is like this thing that's very personal. And that's one of the rocks in my life, that I do things that to other people just seem impractical, out there, maybe just taking it too far, whatever, maybe even wasteful or foolish.
It's probably one of the reasons he encourages anonymity in certain circumstances.
Perhaps.
You know.
Perhaps.
I have a question about that story, and maybe it's a sidebar, maybe it's not going to come up in the full context of the big idea, but I think there's a part there that gets where I think we tend to be derailed because of something Jesus says. He says, you know, the poor you will always have with you. But I am not going to be here. And I mean, really, and especially with this topic of generosity, I think, people tend to turn that phrase into the excuse that allows them to walk by it on the street. And in Chicago, you need some excuses because you're going to get hit every single second.
An excuse to not be generous.
That's right.
So in this story about being generous, is Christian people
taking what Jesus said and turning it into an opportunity to excuse themselves maybe for not being generous.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I like what Francis Chan says about it. He says, the scripture that people know by heart tells you a lot about them. It says only one place in the entire Bible does it ever said the poor you will always have with you. And why do us middle-class American Christ followers know that verse so well? He says it one time that the rest of Scripture is loaded with thousands of verses about the need to be generous with the poor, not because it's the good thing to do, but because they matter to God.
Right.
And yet the verse we memorize is, well, the poor you will always have with you, which is almost like saying, well, come on, sure it matters, but I can't really do anything about it. The poor you will always have with you. And so hopefully none of us memorized this verse, but you know what? I did. I spent a lot of time in churches growing up where everybody knew this verse.
Sure.
And it wasn't because we hated the poor or anything like that. It was because generosity, we wanted some way to make generosity sand and not a rock.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're going. Generosity is a rock, but it's very, very personal. And we want people to have this aha where he goes, you mean what I can do for the Jesus mission, what I can contribute, especially financially, since we got to talk about that from time to time. Jesus certainly did. That is not just sort of boilerplate or cookie cutter Christianity. That's a deeply personal thing between me and Jesus. And goes, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because it's between you and him primarily. It's for him. You do it for him because of what he's done for you. And this is where the life is.
Love it. Love it. All right, let's hit session 6. We're on the home stretch. And that's exciting. Because I need a nap. I need to rest after all of this activity. We're going to make room for a miracle here in session 6. And so what the heck are we talking about? It feels like we've been talking about a lot of these discipline things or a lot of these doing things. But what does it mean to make room in our life to have a rock that is a miracle? Yeah.
I love this particular angle on it. I'm not sure who came up with the idea or who said, hey, let's make sure and talk about that in there. I love this in an Ignite series. I love this anytime anybody is a part of one of our gatherings to go, hey, you know what? We're not one of those groups of people who says that your life should always be full of miracles and it's about these amazing things that God can do to get you a bigger house or to heal you instantaneously. That's not what we're about. But we're also not about what amazing thing can God do that you really need him to do, that you really want him to do? What God thing, what miracle can God do for you? And then, because what happens in our lives is we tend to ask God for miracles when we're in crisis mode, and then when it becomes kind of a chronic thing, we pray about it occasionally and kind of sprinkle in like sand around the edges. It's like going, what would a life look like where life isn't about getting miracles from God, but where that's not something I do only on the fly when I'm freaking out, but it's something that I make room for regularly in my life. And I love the story that we have here. It is maybe my favorite story from all the Gospels, where this guy comes to Jesus and he has this son who is possessed by an evil spirit to the point of where he goes into seizures and falls on the ground and comes near the fire and is like almost burned to death. So this is like a big deal. And the guy says to Jesus, he says, if it's possible, can you heal him? And Jesus, man, I love what he says here, especially. He says, what do you mean if? It's kind of like the old show that I'm thinking about. What do you mean if?
What you talking about, Willis?
Ah, yeah, ding, 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 ding. It's almost like Jesus going, if, what you talking about, Willis? The different strokes, sorry.
And his name was Willis. That's the weird part.
I know.
I know.
Little
Yeah.
known fact.
Yeah, from the Greek.
No extra charge. Willos, I believe it was. Willos. Anyhow, so Jesus goes, what do you mean? Anything's possible for somebody who believes. And this guy says this thing that has been one of the most important things in all the Bible to me. He says, I believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. His son his life is in jeopardy, and he can't do squat about it. Only
And
Jesus
he's been that way his whole life.
Yeah, he's been that way his whole life, but he's still got that urgency, and he's still seeking a miracle, even though he's not even sure if Jesus can. And I know the official answer is God can do anything, but if we really get down at an emotional level, I think if we dig deep, we'll say God can do anything, but this. You know, God can do anything,
But that one thing that he can't
but
do.
fix my marriage.
Right.
God can do anything, but help me get out of this financial hole. And though we'd never intellectually say God can't do it, we live as if he can't, simply because we don't ask. And we say, well, I shouldn't ask because I don't really buy. And it's like this kind of faux authenticity, this patina of like, well, I'm just being a person of integrity because I don't really believe that, so I'm not going to ask. I don't, you know. And this guy says, I believe, but I don't. But I want to, so help me.
Yeah.
And that's how you make room for a miracle. I love it that there's somebody going to be sitting in the service at your campus this weekend who they used to pray their guts out about something, and it hasn't gotten any better. It might have gotten worse, and they ain't praying about it anymore. And they're going to come to service, and they're going to go, that doesn't mean any less to me, but I'm out of crisis mode. I'm into just getting by mode. And so now, whereas before, it's like, man, I don't have to make room for asking God to save me or save this person that I love from this calamity. It was almost automatic because I'm in such despair or dire need about the deal. And we're going, oh, God wants this. He wants me to ask. He wants me to ask him and keep on it. He wants that. He wants room for that in my life. I love it. I love that. I love this story, and I love it that we're going to tell people you don't have to be super Christian. You don't have to be, sort of a name it, claim it, believe it, or it won't happen sort of thing. You can just go, hey, I sort of believe you. I technically believe you can, but I sort of feel like you can't, or I feel like you won't. So help me. And I think, man, that's going to really touch some people, and they're really not going to. I really think nobody's going to see this one coming unless they got the card in the mailer and actually read it.
Right, or they found us on YouTube.
Yes.
I mean, these are public videos, so they can
Oh,
see
they
it.
are?
Well, theoretically, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's possible.
okay.
But there's not enough people really liking them for it to gain traction.
I heard there was like one person.
There's like one jackal who's constantly disliking it.
that-
But I really do think that's going to change.
You
I
reckon?
think it's going to change after this weekend. Yeah, I'm confident.
All right. You know what? I believe.
Help me
Help
with
me.
my unbelief.
Help
Yeah.
me help you,
It's-
Jackal.
it's the internet.
I mean, Eric, or whatever.
Yeah,
Help me overcome my unbelief.
absolutely.
And this is this thing. We ain't saying that following Jesus is about what can God do for you, and today is your day, and just, come on, let's all get on the health and wealth prosperity gospel train. That's not the gig. That's not the deal. However, the life that God wants for you is not the life of the ordinary where you just have to muddle through, and if it seems impossible, it probably is. No, he wants a different life for everybody and every last one of us, and it doesn't mean he's going to do the miracle, and we can't make miracles happen, but we can make room.
Yeah, and it really changes the dynamic, I think, of your daily communication with God, and in a weird way, in kind of a Tai Chi sort of, it gets you right back to the beginning of celebrate. Because it's like that is that we make room for miracles in our lives when we are celebrating who
Hadn't thought
God
of
is
that. Yeah.
and how He works, and I mean it really kind of spins around itself.
How about that?
I think it's good stuff.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we have definitely talked long enough, and kudos to anyone who has made it thus far. in our podcast, and I look forward to all the many ideas that are going to come out of this, not only on the large group front with individual campuses making room for life, but also what takes place in the small group discussion of those things, because we know that that's where a lot of the life change is taking place, is in those small groups as they're discussing these topics, having experienced them on a Sunday. So,
and talking about making room for a miracle, if I could add one more thing
absolutely.
real quick. Some of you are part of a launch team that's starting this series, starting during this series. I know you're praying for a miracle.
Yeah.
If you're part of a campus that's not on a launch team, maybe this series is going to be different for you, that as you plan it, you don't just think about how can I make this best for my campus or our church in general, but how can I do something and ask God to use it in a truly miraculous way. It's like it was just a simple idea that sort of popped into my head, but I remembered it and I wrote it down and I brought it to, I don't know.
Big Idea Factory.
Big Idea Factory, what's that?
Could be. This
Yeah.
thing we do.
Yeah, when is that?
Well, it's we do it a bunch of different times.
Okay.
But we do it the second and or the third and fourth Tuesdays of the month.
Yeah, so this is one, the stakes are always high. If it's possible for the stakes to be extra high, this is the series.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again. My name is Eric Bramlett. I have been joined by Tim Sutherland, and we look forward to lots of awesome things as we make room for this series and we make room for life. So long, everybody.